In a quiet village emerging from a bitter winter, a 19-year-old orphan, a young black man, pedals his late father's worn-out bicycle, scraping by with courier jobs and doing whatever it takes to secure a bed each night. He fights to survive. While hurrying to make his last delivery of the evening, he notices an elderly woman, alone and disoriented, helping her risks missing his deadline and losing his fragile shelter. Yet without a second thought, he rides her home. Unbeknownst to him, she's a wealthy recluse, and what unfolds next will reshape his life forever. The air turned sharper that evening, a chill that pinched at your fingertips and crept beneath your scarf, no matter how tightly it was wrapped. On the outskirts of a sleepy village in early winter, where the sun sank early behind bare oaks and streetlights glowed with a faint stutter, an old train station stood neglected at the end of a weathered platform. Locals passed by as always, some lugging shopping bags, others glued to their screens, or simply rushing to beat the creeping dark. But no one noticed her. The elderly woman stood alone, bundled in a faded grey coat from another era, her white hair escaping a knitted cap, her frail hands gripping a frayed canvas bag as she peered at every passing car, hoping one might stop. Her lips moved, muttering about the number 7 line, about a road that didn't quite fit the signs nearby. Every so often, she stepped toward the platform's edge, only to retreat, her face clouded with uncertainty. Not far off, a young man named Jamal paused to sip from a battered plastic bottle. At 19, his lean frame bore the weight of hardship. Dressed in a threadbare jacket weathered by too many seasons and sneakers held together by sheer will. His bicycle rested against a bench nearby, rusted spokes, creaky brakes, and a wobbly rear rack that seemed one jolt from collapse. It had been his father's, and after his passing, it became Jamal's lifeline, carrying him through the village, delivering packages, groceries or prescriptions, whatever paid. The earnings were meager, but Jamal moved with quiet determination. That evening, he had one final delivery before the 8 p.m. cutoff, one last task, and if he succeeded, he'd have just enough to cover his week's lodging. If not, the motel manager had warned the door would stay locked by morning. Jamal adjusted the strap of his courier bag, preparing to ride, when his gaze caught the elderly woman's hesitant movements. Something about her stillness struck him, not the posture of someone waiting, but of someone adrift. She turned, scanned the empty platform, then stared at her shoes, as if they too were strangers. She murmured something, took a half step, then froze. Jamal paused, the ticking of time pressing against his ribs. Every minute counted now, the thin line between a warm bed and a cold street just one delivery away. But then a gust carried her voice to him, soft, trembling, unmistakably afraid. Maple Street, or was it Grove? Was it the 7? Her words scattered like dry leaves, unheard by anyone else. Without fully knowing why, Jamal approached, guiding his bike alongside. "Ma'am," he said gently, careful not to alarm her, "are you okay?" She blinked at him, her eyes searching as if reaching for a forgotten name. "I'm trying to get home," she said, her voice fragile and drifting. "But I think the train passed me by. Or maybe I passed it." Her laugh was faint, like a brittle twig snapping. Jamal nodded, patient. "Where's home? I might be able to help." She fumbled with her bag, pulling out a crumpled tissue, a key ring with no keys, a faded ticket stub, but no address. Jamal's chest tightened. Then he noticed a thin gold chain around her neck, a small rectangular locket glinting faintly against her coat. He leaned closer, squinting. Engraved in delicate script on the locket's back were the words, "Margaret Clare, 72 Pine Ridge Lane, West End." His breath hitched. Pine Ridge. He knew it, far beyond the village's edge. Nearly 2 hours by bike, mostly uphill. For a moment his mind flashed to the deadline. He'd miss the delivery. He'd lose his room. He'd face the cold tonight. But as he met Margaret's gaze, her eyes soft, fogged with age, yet holding a flicker of trust, simply because he'd stopped, he knew he couldn't turn away. Some decisions carry a weight that logic can't measure. He offered a small smile. "It's a ways off, but we'll get there," he said softly, helping her onto the bike's rear rack. He secured his spare bandana around the seat for comfort and draped his jacket over her shoulders. "Hold on, okay? We'll take it easy." She gave a dazed but grateful chuckle. "You're like my nephew," she said. "Always wore sneakers like yours, always stubborn." Jamal didn't correct her. He just nodded and began pedaling, slow at first, then steady as the village lights faded behind them. The sky shifted from violet to slate, then deeper still. The road curved, climbed, and stretched endlessly, but Jamal pressed on, each pedal stroke fueled by quiet resolve. Behind him, Margaret hummed a melody, sometimes fading out, sometimes pausing to ask where they were, only to forget his answer moments later. He responded each time as if it were the first. Almost there, just past the next rise. The wind sharpened, and streetlights grew scarce, but he kept his focus forward. They crossed fields dusted with frost, past bridges glowing faintly under moonlight, and stopped once for Margaret to rest. With his last coins, he bought her a hot cocoa from a roadside diner, and she insisted he take the first sip. "You're the one pedaling," she said with a gentle firmness that echoed his father's voice. When they reached 72 Pine Ridge Lane, its wrought iron gate weathered but stately, it was past 9:30 p.m. Jamal's legs throbbed, his fingers numb, but he exhaled in relief. He knocked twice, and soon an older man in a sweater vest appeared, his face shifting from worry to astonishment as he saw Margaret. "Miss Claire, where have you been? We've been calling everywhere." Margaret blinked, smiling vaguely. "I went for a stroll, I think, or a ride." She nodded at Jamal. The man thanked him fervently, voice shaking. "Come in, please, warm up, eat something. We'll drive you back." But Jamal shook his head, tired but fulfilled. "I'm good. Gotta get back before it's too late." He jotted his number on a scrap of paper and handed it over, in case she needs help again. Then he climbed back on his bike and rode into the night, unaware that his motel room would be locked, his belongings packed away, but also unaware that something far greater had begun. By the time Jamal reached the village, the streets were dim, the warmth of the diner cocoa long gone from his hands. His knuckles ached, each bump in the road jarring his weary bones. But he didn't grumble. The ride back felt emptier without Margaret's soft humming or the quiet trust of someone relying on him. The wind howled through skeletal trees, carrying the scent of frost and distant chimney smoke. Jamal coasted to the motel, a squat building with chipped paint and a flickering sign. He parked his bike, reached for his key, and found nothing. He checked every pocket, every fold of his clothes, but the truth sank in. The key was gone. He knocked softly, hoping the manager was awake, but no lights flickered. He knocked again, louder. Nothing. The doorknob didn't budge. Then he saw it, a small pile of his things, a spare hoodie, a toothbrush, a frayed charger, stuffed into a trash bag by the door. A note was pinned to the frame, scrawled in Sharpie, "Rent due." Locks changed. His throat tightened. For a long moment, he stood there, bike at his side, torn between anger and despair. He chose neither. Instead, Jamal turned toward the village center. His legs burned from the long ride, but he pedaled anyway, the cold seeping into his lungs, knowing movement was better than surrender. Near midnight, he reached the alley behind Carter's grocery, a small shop where he sometimes sorted stock for stale pastries and a few bucks. The owner, Mr. Carter, was gruff but fair, the kind of man who helped quietly. Jamal parked by the back door, knocked once, and waited. A light blinked on. The door creaked, revealing Mr. Carter in a flannel robe, holding a mug of tea. He eyed Jamal, shivering, eyes heavy, and sighed. "Didn't make rent, did you?" Jamal shook his head. Mr. Carter glanced at the stars, as if expecting an answer from above, then stepped aside. "Stockroom's warm enough? There's a mattress in the corner. Don't mess with the canned goods, and don't die on me." Jamal murmured a thank you and stepped inside. The stockroom smelled of flour and apples, its only heat from a rattling space heater. He didn't care. Wrapping himself in the mattress's thin blanket, he sank down, body aching, chest heavy, but his mind oddly calm. For the first time in months, sleep came without fear. Something about the ride, Margaret's hand on his arm, her soft laugh in the dark, had softened the world's edges. He drifted off, thinking not of the locked motel door, but of the locket's glint, the rhythm of tires on pavement, and a voice saying, "You're like my nephew." Outside, the wind battered the shop's walls, but Jamal slept deeply, unaware that miles away, a woman sat by her fireplace, now clear-minded. In her hands was the scrap of paper with his number, and in her heart was his name, spoken softly like a vow. The first warmth she'd felt in her silent home in years. Morning crept in softly, grey and cautious, as if the sky hesitated to disturb the quiet. A pale light filtered through the stockroom's foggy window, settling over Jamal, still curled under the blanket. The cold clung to the walls, seeping through the old bricks, but he slept on, his body stiff from the hard mattress, his heart heavy with the weight of too many days spent on the edge of survival. When he woke, he rose without complaint, folding the blanket neatly and slipping to the shop's front, his sneakers silent on the tile. Mr. Carter was already there, unlocking the register with the steady rhythm of a man for whom routine was sacred. He grunted at Jamal, sliding a pear and a lukewarm coffee across the counter. No words, just a nod that said enough. Jamal took the pear, peeling it slowly, and stood by the window, watching the village stir. Exhaust puffed from idling trucks. Kids trudged to school, scarves flapping. A cat darted across the street. Just another morning, indistinguishable from the rest, until a sleek silver car pulled up. It didn't fit here, too pristine, too silent, easing to the curb like it knew its purpose. The woman who stepped out was tall, her coat too elegant for these streets, her boots spotless, her movements precise. She glanced at a note in her hand, then peered through the shop window, her gaze locking on Jamal like she'd always known he'd be there. When the door's bell jingled and she entered, the room felt smaller. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "I'm looking for Jamal." He turned, pausing mid-bite. "That's me," he said warily. Her face softened. "Miss Margaret Clare sent me," she said. "She asked me to find you. She remembers everything now and wants to thank you herself." Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. Jamal glanced at the paper in her hand, recognizing his own scrawl, the number he'd given without expectation. Lydia, as she introduced herself, held the door, gesturing to the car. "She's waiting if you're willing to come." Jamal hesitated, a flicker of doubt in his chest. Stepping back into that world, that grand house, felt like crossing a threshold he didn't belong in. He was just a courier, homeless now, with nothing but a bike and a bag. He'd done what felt right, nothing more. "I just wanted her to get home safe," he said quietly, firmly. Lydia studied him, her expression warm but resolute. "You did," she replied. "But she says you gave her something more, a piece of herself she'd lost. She wants to tell you that in person." Jamal glanced at Mr. Carter, who shrugged, his gruffness hiding care. "Go on," he said. "Mattress'll still be here." With a deep breath, Jamal nodded and followed Lydia. The drive to Pine Ridge was strange in daylight. The trees that had loomed like ghosts now stood serene, their branches stark against the sky. The hills felt gentler, the turns less daunting, but Jamal remembered each one, every rut and rise etched into his muscles. At the estate, the gate gleamed in the morning light, less imposing now. Lydia led him through a side door into a room of soft sunlight, old paintings and the scent of lavender. There sat Margaret, no longer the confused wanderer, but a woman with clear eyes and a warm presence. When she saw Jamal, her smile was like dawn breaking. "You," she said, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "You brought me home." She took his hands, her grip firm yet kind. "I remember it all, every road, every word. You didn't treat me like a burden. You made me feel seen." Jamal lowered his gaze, the weight of her words too big for the simple act he'd done. But Margaret continued, her eyes searching his. "I don't know your story," she said, "but I'd like to. If you have nowhere to go, I'd be honored to offer you a place here. Not just for a night, but for as long as you need. This house is too empty and you'd bring it life." Jamal blinked, stunned by the offer. It was beyond generous, yet part of him pushed back. "That's kind of you," he said, voice steady, "but I didn't do it for a reward. I just wanted you safe." Margaret's gaze held firm. "And that," she said softly, "is why I'm asking you to stay." Silence settled between them, warm but uncertain, heavy with something unspoken. Though Jamal returned to the stockroom that night, sleeping again on the creaky mattress, something had changed. He'd been seen not for his struggles but for his heart, the quiet strength of someone who acted when no one else did. And miles away, Margaret sat by her window, her heart lighter, already planning to ask again, not out of pity, but from a deep recognition that family is sometimes found in those who guide you home through the dark. The next morning dawned softer, the sky streaked with faint pinks, as if the sun were easing into the day. In the stockroom, Jamal rose early, tidying shelves and stacking boxes, his thoughts tangled with Margaret's words. They'd echoed through his dreams, each one lingering like a melody he couldn't shake. Her presence hadn't filled the room, it had warmed it, yet he didn't know how to accept such kindness, offered so freely from someone who saw him not as broken, but as whole. As he moved a crate of apples, the shop's bell chimed, not the usual sharp clang, but a gentle ring that felt familiar. He looked up, and there was Margaret, no driver, no grandeur, just a shawl over her shoulders and a small purse in her hands. Her eyes found him immediately, as if she'd known exactly where to look. Jamal straightened, brushing his hands on his jeans. She smiled and approached, not with the weight of wealth, but with the ease of someone sharing a moment. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said, her voice soft as the morning. "I couldn't stop thinking about you." She paused, then added, "That sounds odd, I know, but it's meant with care." Jamal nodded, words caught in his throat. She glanced around the shop, then leaned closer, her voice low, intimate. "I've lived in that house for decades," she began. "It's never felt so still as it did this morning, not since my sister passed, not since my nephew moved away. You remind me of him, his heart, his quiet way of seeing people. When you helped me that night, without hesitation, something in me stirred, something I thought was gone." Jamal's fingers tightened on the counter's edge. Margaret reached into her purse, pulling out a handwritten note on creamy paper, its lines slightly uneven. "This isn't a bargain," she said. "It's an invitation. My home has too many rooms and too few reasons to open them. Stay, just until you're steady. No expectations, just a hand to hold you up." Jamal unfolded the note. It offered a room at the estate, a small monthly allowance, and, in gentler handwriting, a promise. "We'll help you finish school, if that's still your dream." He stood silent, the world outside moving in slow motion, bicycles creaking past, leaves drifting, the village humming, unaware that something was shifting inside this shop. Finally, Jamal met her eyes, not with doubt, but with resolve. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like to come." And so, he did. That afternoon, Lydia arrived with the car, not for show, but because Margaret refused to let him pedal up the hill again. Jamal packed his few belongings into a duffel, said goodbye to Mr. Carter, who handed him a bag of muffins and grunted, "Took you long enough." Then he slid into the car, its leather seats smelling of cedar and promise. Life at the estate was quiet, not lavish. Jamal got a room with a view of the orchard, a schedule that gave him time to breathe, and within weeks he was back in school, funded by a scholarship. She never flaunted his story or treated him like a cause. Instead, she wove him into her life. Morning strolls through the garden, evening talks over chamomile, weekends planning how to share their time and resources. Together, they built something Margaret had long envisioned, but never started alone. The Maple Glow Fund, named for the street she'd forgotten and the kindness she'd always remember. Its goal was clear: to uplift young people with dreams, but no means, to care for elders who'd been overlooked, and to prove that compassion and respect were rights, not privileges. Jamal shaped its first initiatives, met with mentors, worked part-time at the fund's community hub, and sometimes rode his old bike into the village, not out of need, but to remember where he'd started and what a single act of care could become. Each time he passed the train station where it all began, he'd slow down, glance at the sky and smile. Because sometimes home finds you, not the other way around. And sometimes all it takes to change a life is pausing to see someone truly and going a little further than you meant to. Join us to share inspiring stories by clicking like and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to begin your day with deep lessons and heartfelt connection. Small act of courage. A moment of seeing someone clearly can ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the moment itself. Months passed, and the Maple Glow Fund grew steadily, its roots sinking deep into the village and beyond. Jamal, now settled in his room at the estate, found himself not just a beneficiary of Margaret's kindness but a partner in her vision. He spent mornings studying for his classes, afternoons at the community hub, and evenings sketching ideas for the fund's next steps: scholarships, meal programs, a mobile library for the elderly. Each idea felt like a brick in a foundation he hadn't known he could build. Margaret, for her part, seemed to come alive in a way she hadn't in years. Her steps were surer, her laughter quicker, as if Jamal's presence had rekindled a spark, long buried under the weight of solitude. She'd sit with him in the estate's library, sharing stories of her youth, tales of her nephew's mischief, her sister's fierce love, the small joys that had once filled her home. Jamal listened, his quiet attention a gift as profound as the one she'd given him. Sometimes she'd pause, her eyes distant, and say, "You've given me more than a homecoming. Jamal, you've given me purpose." The village noticed the change too. The Maple Glow Fund's work began to draw attention, first locally, then further afield. A nearby town asked for help setting up a similar program. A regional paper ran a story, though Margaret insisted it focus on the fund's mission, not her wealth or Jamal's story. "It's not about us," she'd say, her voice firm but warm. "It's about what we can do together." Jamal agreed, though he couldn't help but feel a quiet pride when he saw kids his age, kids who'd once been like him, scraping by, walk into the hub with hope in their eyes, clutching applications for tutoring or job training. One chilly afternoon, as winter crept back toward the village, Jamal rode his bike to the train station, not for any reason other than to sit where it all began. The platform was empty, the air sharp with the promise of snow. He leaned his bike against the same bench, his breath visible in the cold, and let his mind wander. He thought of his father, whose hands had once gripped these handlebars, whose voice still echoed in Jamal's stubborn resolve. He thought of Margaret, whose locket had been a beacon, guiding them both to something greater. And he thought of himself, not the boy who'd pedaled through desperation, but the young man who'd found a path, not just for himself but for others. As he sat, a familiar silver car pulled up, its tires crunching softly on the gravel. Margaret stepped out, her shawl wrapped tightly against the wind, her smile as warm as ever. "I thought I might find you here," she said, easing onto the bench beside him. "This place feels like a bookmark, doesn't it?" A moment where the story turned. Jamal nodded, his throat tight. "I keep thinking about how I almost didn't stop," he admitted, his voice low. "I was so focused on making that delivery, on keeping my room. If I hadn't looked up—" Margaret reached over, resting a hand on his arm. "But you did," she said simply. "And that's what matters. You saw me, Jamal. Not many people do, not really." She paused, her eyes tracing the horizon where the village lights began to flicker on. "I've lived a long life, seen a lot of choices made and unmade. Yours was one of the truest I've ever known." Jamal looked at her, the weight of her words settling into him like a stone into still water. He didn't know how to respond, so he just sat with her, the two of them sharing the quiet as the sky darkened. Later that evening, back at the estate, they sat by the fireplace, a ritual that had become their own. Margaret handed Jamal a small box, no wrapping, just plain wood with a simple latch. "It's not much," she said, "but it's yours." Inside was a new keyring, engraved with the words Maple Glow and a single key, not to a room, but to the community hub, a symbol of his role in its future. Jamal turned it over in his hands, the metal cool against his palm. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. Margaret smiled. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being you." As the fire crackled, Jamal felt something shift inside him, a certainty, fragile but growing, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The boy who'd once pedaled through the dark, chasing survival, had become a man who built bridges, not just for himself, but for anyone who needed a way across. And Margaret, who'd once stood lost at a station, had found not just her home but a family, in the young man who'd stopped to ask if she was okay. Their story wasn't finished, but it was no longer just theirs. It belonged to every life the Maple Glow Fund touched, every heart it warmed, every path it lit. The village slept under a blanket of frost that night, but in the estate's glow, Jamal and Margaret planned for spring, new programs, new dreams, new ways to carry forward the light they'd kindled together. And somewhere in the quiet of the train station, the wind whispered across the empty platform, as if to say that sometimes the smallest moments hold the power to change everything. Join us to share stories that matter by clicking like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to fill your days with lessons of courage and compassion. Thanks for watching.